The sun bore down on the cracked asphalt of forgotten town, somewhere between nowhere and not quite civilization in rural Texas. Heat shimmered in waves over the rusted skeletons of gas pumps long out of commission, their faded logos barely legible beneath years of dirt and sun bleaching. Next to the pump stood a dilapidated garage, once proud, now just a husk of corrugated metal and broken windows. That was where the group of 5 teens had gathered, all of them greasy-handed and sweat-soaked, circling a car that looked like it had been dragged from the bottom of a scrapyard. The car was a '68 Dodge Charger, or at least what was left of one. Its faded red paint was more rust than color. The hood was propped open with a warped tire iron, and tools lay scattered around like the aftermath of mechanical war. The teens, Nick, Jace, Tyrell, Logan, and Zoe, had been trying for weeks to get the beast running. So far, it had only coughed, sputtered, and stubbornly refused to cooperate. "Try again," Nick muttered, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. Logan cranked the key. Nothing. Just a click and the same dead silence. Tyrell cursed under his breath and kicked the front tire. "I'm telling you, it's a timing chain," Zoe said, perched on a milk crate and thumbing through a dog-eared repair manual. "We're chasing our own tail with the fuel line." Before anyone could argue, a shadow stretched across the hood. A man stood there just outside their circle. He was older, maybe in his 60s, but it was hard to tell. His clothes were worn-out jeans and a frayed denim shirt, both stained with old grease and oil. His boots were cracked and sun-bleached. A trucker cap shaded most of his face, but the stubble on his jaw was white, and the lines around his mouth spoke of years under sun. What struck them most wasn't his appearance. It was the way he looked at the car, like it wasn't a wreck, but a puzzle, or maybe a memory. "I can fix it," he said quietly, his voice rough like sandpaper, in exchange for food. The group froze. Tyrell scoffed first, followed by a snort from Logan. Nick tried to suppress a grin. Zoe raised an eyebrow. Jace, ever the bold one, laughed openly. "You serious?" Jace asked, "You want to fix this thing for a sandwich?" The old man didn't smile. "I didn't say sandwich. I said food." Zoe stood up, folding her arms. "You a mechanic?" "Something like that." The man replied. "Looks more like a drifter," Logan muttered. "You got a name, old man?" The stranger's eyes lingered on the Charger, ignoring the jabs. Bill Carter. The name meant nothing to them. Just another vagrant, probably looking for a handout. Still, there was something about the way he stood. Calm, unbothered by the heat, the attitude, the laughter. He had the quiet air of someone who didn't care what they thought. Nick shrugged. "It's not like we're getting anywhere. Let the guy try. Worst case, we waste 10 minutes and lose a microwave burrito." With a nod, he tossed Bill a wrench. The old man caught it without looking. The group stepped back, partly curious, mostly amused. Bill didn't say another word. He leaned into the engine bay, moving with unexpected precision. His fingers traced the wiring, brushed the hoses, and tested connections with the ease of someone who didn't need diagrams. He asked for a socket set and a pair of pliers, then adjusted the distributor and cleaned off a sensor with the edge of his shirt. 5 minutes later, he stepped back. "Try it now." Logan slid behind the wheel again, smirking. "Sure thing, Bill." He turned the key. The Charger gave a cough, then another, and then impossibly the engine roared to life. A deep, throaty rumble shook the frame as the idle settled into a steady rhythm. The group stared, mouths open. "No way," Tyrell whispered. Zoe leaned closer, eyes wide. That shouldn't have worked." Bill just stepped back and wiped his hands on his jeans. "It's not about what should or shouldn't. It's about what is." Jace looked at the engine, then back at the stranger. "How the hell did you do that?" Bill only said, "You owe me food." Nick grabbed a leftover pizza from the cooler and handed over 2 slices. Bill took them wordlessly, sat on an overturned oil drum, and ate slowly, never looking up. The teens watched him in stunned silence, their earlier mockery now replaced by something else. Not quite respect, but something inching toward it. As the Charger idled behind them, alive and rumbling for the first time in years. Zoe whispered what they were all starting to wonder. Who the hell is this guy? The Charger's engine purred with an almost arrogant rhythm, its deep growl echoing against the crumbling walls of the old gas station like a ghost that had been roused from a long slumber. The teen stood frozen, not out of fear but disbelief, like waking up to find a long-dead star burning in the sky again. But the man who had resurrected it, Bill Carter, ate his slices of pizza in silence, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. The roar of the machine he'd revived didn't seem to impress him. It barely registered. No one knew what to say. The car ran. Not barely, not in some limping jury-rig way. It ran clean, smooth. Logan walked slowly around it, eyes scanning every angle, as if expecting to see the illusion crack. "Okay," he finally said, breaking the silence. "So he's not a fraud." "Fraud," Tyrell muttered. "That's wizardry." "Or experience," Zoe said, her eyes never leaving the man now sipping water from an old thermos. He knew exactly what to touch. No hesitation. Bill finished eating, brushed crumbs from his lap, and stood up without a word. The moment his boots hit the pavement, the group instinctively parted, allowing him to walk toward the Charger. He didn't touch it again, just stood there, looking at it. "You rebuilt the carburetor, didn't you?" Zoe asked. He gave a faint nod, repositioned it, adjusted the float, cleared the jets. The fuel lines were fine. "You were wasting your time on them. How could you tell so fast?" Nick asked. Bill's eyes remained on the engine. "I've heard this sound before. I've smelled these leaks. Felt this heat on my hands more times than I can count." He turned and started walking away. "Wait!" Jace called out. "That's it? You're just gonna leave?" Bill didn't stop. "I came for food. Got what I needed. You live around here?" Logan asked. "No." "Then where are you going?" Bill paused at the edge of the lot, looked over his shoulder, and said, "Wherever the next fix is." Then he walked into the late afternoon sun, his silhouette swallowed slowly by the brightness. They stood in stunned silence, unsure whether to follow or let him go. Zoe was the first to move, grabbing her phone and snapping a photo of the Charger's engine bay. "That wasn't luck," she said. "That was skill, crazy precise mechanical genius." Tyrell chuckled. "We just got schooled by a dude who looked like he hadn't bathed in a month." Logan shook his head. "There's something off about this whole thing. No one just walks up and does that. Who the hell is he?" Back in town, the group stopped by the local burger joint, one of the only places open past dusk. It was a narrow, neon-lit hole in the wall with old racing posters lining the walls and a jukebox that hadn't worked since the early 2000s. As they waited for their food, the conversation returned to man. "I still say it's crazy," Jay said, unwrapping his burger. "How can someone just fix something like that? It wasn't just the engine. The idle's perfect. The timing's perfect. Even the belts aren't whining anymore. Maybe he's a retired mechanic," Nick offered. "Someone who used to run a shop." Zoe shook her head. "That wasn't shop training. That was track level. You don't move like that unless you worked under pressure. Serious pressure. Pittsburgh Lane kind of pressure." Tyrell looked thoughtful. "What if he used a race?" They all fell silent. The idea wasn't far-fetched. In fact, it made too much sense. Zoe pulled out her phone and typed quickly. Bill Carter. Texas. Mechanic. Racer. Nothing. No images. No articles. Just dead links and generic names. Jace leaned over. "Try adding Le Mans or Indy or something." She did. Still nothing. "What if he's using a fake name?" Logan suggested. "Like hiding from something?" "Or someone," Tyrell added. Nick frowned. "No, that was his real name." He didn't flinch when he said it. People hiding lie differently. This guy didn't care whether we believed him or not. That night, Zoe couldn't sleep. Her mind kept looping back to the way Bill had handled the engine, the calm in his voice, the confidence in his hands. There was something haunting about him, like a man who had seen and lost too much, but still carried all of it in his fingers. She sat at her desk, staring at her laptop. The search bar mocked her with its emptiness. No digital fingerprint. No record. It was like Bill Carter didn't exist. The next morning, they went back to the station, half expecting to find it empty. But Bill was there, seated inside the old garage, leaning back in a beat-up lawn chair, a thermos in one hand and a tattered auto magazine in the other. He didn't look surprised to see them. If anything, he seemed to have expected it. "We brought breakfast," Nick said, lifting a paper bag. Bill gestured to the workbench without a word. They sat around, awkward at first, then gradually more comfortable as they watched him examine the engine again. Not because it needed fixing, but because he wanted to make sure it stayed alive. He ran his hand over the hood like someone touching a wounded animal that had finally healed. Zoe finally spoke up. "You raced once, didn't you?" Bill didn't look at her. "Once. Maybe more." "You were good." He gave a dry chuckle. "Does it matter now?" "It does to us," she replied, "because we're trying to learn. And we think you might be the best teacher we'll ever find." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached over and picked up a small, grease-stained notepad. He flipped through it, revealing diagrams, torque ratios, handwritten notes on camshaft angles, and engine compression numbers that none of them could follow. "I don't teach," he said. "I fix." Tyrell leaned forward. "But what if we want to learn how to fix?" That made him pause. He looked at the group, not with warmth, but with a quiet, assessing gaze. He saw something in their faces. Or maybe he remembered something. Finally, he said, "You got tools?" They nodded. "You got patience?" They looked at each other, unsure. "Then come back tomorrow. Early, before the sun bakes this place." He turned and disappeared back into the garage. The group stood in the dust, stunned again, but this time for a different reason. He hadn't said yes, but he hadn't said no either. And somewhere in the hum of the still-running Charger, they all felt it. The ignition of something they didn't yet understand. Something alive. Something real. The next morning, before the sun could cast its full weight across the Texas plains, the group arrived at the old gas station. Dust trailed behind their truck, like a memory that wouldn't quite settle. The place looked the same, silent, skeletal, but something felt different. Maybe it was a faint smell of oil and heat in the air, or the knowledge that someone was already inside, waiting. Bill Carter was standing by the Charger, sleeves rolled, a cigarette burning down between his fingers, though he never seemed to actually smoke it. Tools lay arranged on a cloth like instruments in an operating room. He didn't greet them, just nodded once and motioned toward the car. "You wanted to learn," he said. "Start by listening." For the next hour, he didn't explain, he demonstrated. His movements were measured, deliberate, each action carrying the weight of thousands of repetitions. He didn't ask for help. He expected them to watch, absorb, remember. When Zoe tried to ask about torque specs, he cut her off with a glance. When Logan fumbled a wrench, he said nothing, just repositioned it and moved on. No lectures, no encouragement, only rhythm and precision. Nick, frustrated, finally blurted, "You ever going to tell us why you're here?" "Why now?" Bill didn't look up. "Because this engine doesn't lie. People do." The response shut them all up. Later that day, as the heat peaked and the sweat soaked their shirts, Zoe stepped aside to make a call. She didn't go far, just to the edge of the property, where the signal was barely strong enough. She dialed her grandfather. He lived 2 towns over, an old man who'd once raced dirt tracks before arthritis took his hands. She told him everything about the Charger, the man, the miracle fix. When she mentioned the name, there was a long pause on the other end. "You said Bill Carter?" "Yes," she replied. "You know him?" Silence. "Zoe," he finally said, "get away from that man." "What? Why?" "That's not just anyone. That man, he was something else. He shouldn't be there. He disappeared." "Disappeared how?" Her grandfather exhaled slowly. "I saw him race once. Just once. It was enough. He wasn't flashy. He didn't talk much. But he moved like the car answered only to him. They said he had the touch, the way a violinist has a touch, or a surgeon. He didn't drive. He communed. Then one day, after winning big, he vanished. No press, no farewell, just gone. Some said he died. Some said he walked away after betrayal. Zoe's heart pounded. Betrayal? I don't know all the details. No one does. But if it's really him, you kids owe him more than a meal. You're looking at the ghost of the man the racing world never deserved. She hung up, heart racing. When she returned, Bill was already packing up for the day, muttering something about the heat-killing good engines and stupid questions. That night, the group gathered at Tyrell's uncle's garage, a place filled with decades of memorabilia, mostly untouched. Old banners from NASCAR races, rusted pistons hung like trophies, black and white photos curling at the edges. It was here that Zoe told them what she'd learned. The room fell silent. So, he's not just some old-timer, Nick said. He's a legend? If it's really him, Zoe replied. Why would a legend live like that? Logan asked. He could be rich. Tyrell leaned back. Unless someone made sure he wouldn't be. They scoured the garage, searching for any trace, any clue. Toward the back, near a sagging filing cabinet, Zoe found a box filled with old racing magazines. She flipped through them, one by one, searching for any mention of Bill Carter. Nothing. Then, halfway through a yellowed issue of Track and Power Monthly, she found it. A half-page article, barely visible through the faded ink. Bill Carter wins Le Mans. Disappears weeks later. She read aloud. After a stunning performance at Le Mans, taking first place against overwhelming odds, Bill Carter declined all post-race interviews and vanished from the public eye. His team declined comment. Rumors of internal disputes, sabotage, and contract disputes swirl. Carter, once considered the rising star of American motorsport, has not been seen since. They passed the clipping around like it was a holy relic. Jace narrowed his eyes. You're telling me this guy was on top of the world and just quit? Or was forced out, Zoe said. Nick frowned. But why erase him? Why hide everything? No idea, Tyrell said. But we're not dealing with just a drifter. This is someone who lost everything and didn't want to be found. They agreed to dig deeper. The next morning, they returned earlier than before. Bill was already there, working on something under a tarp. He didn't acknowledge them, not even when Zoe stepped closer and gently placed a newspaper clipping on the edge of his workbench. We know who you are, she said. Bill didn't flinch, didn't speak, just stared at the headline for a long moment. Then finally, you don't know anything. Zoe didn't push. Then tell us. He looked at the group one by one, his face unreadable. No, he said, not now. Maybe not ever. He folded the clipping and tucked it into his back pocket. You still want to learn? He asked, shifting the tarp to reveal an old frame of his '71 Mustang Mach 1. They nodded. Then get your hands dirty. No more talk of Le Mans. No more questions about the past. Bill threw himself into the rebuild with terrifying focus. He barked instructions, corrected mistakes with sharp eye, and expected silence unless spoken to. The group obeyed. But in that silence, something else began to build. A sense of trust. Fragile, unspoken, forged in sweat and steel. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't revelation. It was a beginning of understanding. The summer heat didn't let up. By midweek, the ground shimmered with dry waves. The sky pressed down heavy and relentless, and the makeshift workshop inside the old gas station grew hotter than any of them could stand. Still, they showed up early each day, dragging in battered coolers, bags of fast food, and whatever tools they could beg or borrow. Bill, true to his wordless routines, was always there before them, sometimes already under the hood, sometimes just sitting, staring at the ground like it owed him something he could never quite collect. The Mustang restoration was unlike anything they had done before. Bill pushed them hard, harder than they were used to, and his expectations were unspoken but rigid. He never complimented progress, only corrected missteps. The smallest mistake, a bolt over-torqued, a wire routed poorly, earned a cold look or a quiet order to redo the job completely. It was brutal, but it was real. Jace cracked first. You know, he muttered one afternoon while trying to mount the new suspension. The old guy acts like he's some racing god, but maybe he just got lucky. One big win, and then he ran. I mean, who disappears after Le Mans unless they've got something to hide? Logan nodded silently. Tyrell didn't respond. Nick kept his eyes on the wrench in his hand, but Zoe stood abruptly and walked out into the sunlight without saying a word. The unspoken pact that had kept their doubts silent was starting to fray. Later that evening, Logan sat on the hood of his dad's truck, flipping through old racing forums on his phone. They had tried search engines, newspaper archives, even scanned racing podcasts for mentions of Bill Carter. Nothing. It was almost eerie. For a man who had supposedly stood atop one of the world's most prestigious racing events, there was almost no trace. No interviews, no articles, no video footage. Just that single, faded article Zoe had found. A ghost story. When Zoe returned, she was carrying a thick folder, dusty from years inside her grandfather's garage. She dropped it onto the makeshift workbench where the group had gathered. This is all he had, she said, from the racing years. Most of it's junk. Old programs. Race tickets. Scribbled notes. But look at this. She pulled out a photograph. A grainy shot of a pit crew, early 1980s. The lighting was harsh and the colors washed out. But there, near the edge of the frame, stood a man in a fire suit. Helmet under one arm. Head turned slightly away from the camera, but the jawline and the posture were unmistakable. Is that him? Tyrell asked. Zoe nodded. It has to be. Nick leaned closer. That's not just any team. That's Apex United. They were huge back then. If he was part of that team, why the hell would they let him disappear? No one had an answer, but the folder had more. Old timing sheets. A few autographs from famous drivers. Handwritten notes with lap data that matched the format of major endurance races. It was as if someone had taken the time to remember the margins while the world forgot the name. The next day, Zoe waited until the others were distracted rebuilding the carburetor, then stepped inside the dark corner of the garage where Bill sat alone, nursing a bruised hand wrapped in a torn rag. I found a photo, she said. A real one. You with Apex United. He didn't move. She continued. Why won't you tell us what happened? He looked up, and for the first time, the weight behind his eyes wasn't anger or silence. It was grief. Because it doesn't matter, he said. What matters is what you're building now, not what I lost. But it does matter, she insisted. You disappeared. No one just walks away from Le Mans unless something broke. Someone did this to you, didn't they? He stood slowly, every movement like it hurt. Not physically, but somewhere deeper. His voice was quiet. You want the truth? Fine. I said no. That's all. No to what? A deal. A trade. Something I wasn't willing to become. She waited, but he said no more. Just turned back to the bench and picked up his tools. The days that followed were filled with friction. Jace grew more cynical, Tyrell more reserved. Nick stopped cracking jokes. The pressure was changing them. Not just the work, but the uncertainty. Was Bill Carter a legend or a fraud hiding behind the myth of one perfect race? And if he was the real deal, why bury everything? Why let history erase him without a fight? Then came the night Logan tried to prove it. After hours, while the others had gone home, he stayed behind. He waited until Bill left, then snuck back into the garage with a flashlight and his phone camera. He filmed everything. Bill's tools, the Mustang frame, the notebooks they'd only glanced at before. One of them had fallen off the shelf and lay half open on the floor. Logan picked it up. Inside were pages of detailed tuning records, precise measurements, corner-by-corner strategy notes for tracks across Europe and North America. He recognized some of the circuits: Nürburgring, Sebring, Road Atlanta. At the back of the notebook, there was a photo wedged between pages. It was a press shot. A younger Bill, face clean shaven, standing next to a sleek prototype race car under a banner that read, Apex United, Championship Series 1984. His name was stitched into the jumpsuit. There was no question now. Logan backed away slowly, phone still filming, and accidentally knocked over a stack of parts. The noise was enough. A light flipped on from the corner of the garage. Bill was there. You looking for proof? He asked. Logan froze. Yeah, I guess. Bill didn't raise his voice, but the disappointment in it was worse than anger. I gave you everything I had left, he said, and you still need to steal to believe it. I just wanted to understand. Bill stepped forward and took the notebook from his hands. No, you wanted a story. Something you could tell yourselves to feel part of something bigger. But you don't get to ask for my past if you're not willing to carry its weight. He turned away, and Logan left without another word. The next morning, Bill didn't show up. The garage was locked. The Charger and the Mustang sat untouched. The silence felt heavier than any words. Zoe tried to call. No answer. Tyrell went by the diner and the bus station. No one had seen him. Nick drove out past the train yard, checking every abandoned building they knew he sometimes wandered near. Nothing. They had reached the first real wall. Not a mechanical problem. Not a rusted bolt or misaligned piston. But trust. And they had cracked it. The garage stayed locked for 3 days. By the second day, the group had started unraveling. Zoe paced circles around her own doubt, replaying every conversation she had had with Bill. Nick busied himself with anything mechanical just to keep his hands moving, while Tyrell tried to reassure the others that Bill just needed space. Logan barely spoke at all. No one had to say it aloud, but they all knew who had crossed the line that drove Bill away. And Logan carried it like lead in his chest. Jace, restless and sharp as ever, had taken another route. He started looking again, this time through local records, old raised bulletins, anything off the digital grid. Something about Bill's silence gnawed at him, and now that they knew Bill had truly been someone in the past, he couldn't let it go. If the man wouldn't talk, then maybe the town would. It was Zoe who found the first clue, though not where she expected. She had returned to her grandfather's garage in search of more papers. Anything that might mention Bill Carter or Apex United. Most of the boxes had already been searched, but this time, she noticed a rusted metal filing cabinet that hadn't been opened in years. She pried it open, coughing as dust lifted in a cloud, and found several thin folders labeled by year. One was marked 1985. Inside, behind yellowed receipts and race entry forms, was a single laminated newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Disgraced racer vanishes after refusing Apex contract. Carter's silence speaks volumes." Zoe froze. The article was short, not even above the fold. But what it lacked in length, it made up for in implications. William Carter, former Apex United driver and recent Le Mans champion, failed to appear at a scheduled press conference last week, just days after refusing a rumored multi-year deal with Apex Racing Corporation. Insiders suggest the contract required Carter to accept a controversial engineering override system, granting corporate engineers real-time control of vehicle performance during races. Carter, known for his fiercely independent racing style, reportedly walked away without comment. Apex Racing has declined to confirm or deny Carter's dismissal. His current whereabouts remain unknown. At the bottom was a blurry photograph of Bill, mid-stride, walking away from a line of team trailers. His face was turned, but it was unmistakably him. She brought the clipping straight to the others. They read it in stunned silence, then again, slower. "So it wasn't sabotage," Nick muttered. "It was a choice. A choice not be controlled," Zoe said. "He didn't sell out." "Yeah, but look what it cost him," Tyrell replied. "Everything." They sat in silence around the cluttered workbench. No one said what they were all thinking, that Bill had given them more than mechanics. He had given them a glimpse into what it meant to walk away from power when it demanded your soul in return. That night, Logan left a note at the garage door. "I was wrong. You didn't owe us anything, and we took too much. I'm sorry." It remained untouched for another 2 days. Then, early one morning, the door was open again. Bill didn't say anything when they arrived. He was under the Mustang, legs sticking out, tools clinking against metal. They didn't crowd him. They went straight to work. No questions, no apologies. Not with words, at least. But when Logan handed him a torque wrench without needing to be asked, Bill gave him a look. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't anger either. Later, as Zoe helped him rewire the dash, she placed a newspaper clipping beside the socket set. "I thought you should have this," she said quietly. He looked at it, then turned back to wires. "I don't need a reminder of what I gave up." "It's not for you," she said. "It's for us." He paused, then folded the clipping neatly and slid it into his back pocket, just like he had with the first one. "You still think I'm a legend?" he asked. "No," she said. "I think you're someone who made the kind of choice most people never get to make, and live with it." He didn't reply, but the next time he spoke, it wasn't about engines or alignment. "You know what they wanted me to do?" he said. "They wanted me to win, without driving. Let the car think for me. Let the telemetry override my decisions. That's not racing. That's performance art." Tyrell glanced over. "So you said no." "I said no in front of the board. In front of the sponsor. I said it to their faces. And then I left before they could spin it into something polite. Nick looked up from under the hood. That's why they erased you." "They didn't have to. I did it myself," Bill said, "because I knew if I stayed, I'd become what I hated. So I let it all burn." "And the world forgot," Logan added softly. "Exactly as I planned," Bill replied. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridgeline, they gathered outside the garage. The Mustang show was almost ready for primer. The Charger, still running, now gleamed with strange new pride. A silence settled over them, not heavy this time, but steady, the kind that only comes when something unspoken has been resolved. Zoe looked at Bill. "Would you ever go back?" "To racing?" he asked. "No, to being seen." Bill studied her for a long moment. "I don't know," he said, "but you kids, you're building something worth seeing." It was the closest thing to a compliment he had ever given them. That night, Zoe scanned the article and pinned it above her bed, not because it proved anything, but because it reminded her that walking away was sometimes the loudest thing a person could do. And Bill Carter, for all his silence, had spoken volumes. By the time the Mustang's body was primed and the engine block aligned with the transmission mount, the garage had transformed. What once resembled a graveyard of rust and silence had become a place of revival, not just for machines, but for the people working on them. Bill no longer hovered like a ghost, and the group no longer looked at him like a mystery to solve. They had stopped asking about the past. But the past, it turned out, wasn't done with them. It was Jace who stumbled across the next clue. He wasn't searching this time. It came to him through a video suggested by an algorithm buried among automotive podcasts. The thumbnail was old, an interview clip with the title The Apex Era, interview with the king of the track. He almost skipped it, but the name caught his eye, Marcus Holloway. The interview was 10 years old, but the quality was decent. It opened with Holloway laughing, comfortably seated in a leather chair, his suit pressed, his grin sharp and polished. Behind him was a wall of trophies and a photo of the Apex United pit team from the early 1980s. Jace froze the frame. There, barely visible, was the same blurred figure from Zoe's newspaper clipping. Bill, younger and cleaner, standing 3 paces behind Holloway. He brought it straight to the others. "Holloway," Zoe repeated, brows furrowed. "That guy's everywhere. Sponsorships, TV appearances, even his own foundation now." "Yeah," Jay said, rewinding the video. "And he used to be Carter's teammate." They watched together as the interview continued. Holloway spoke with rehearsed charm about his early days, racing with Apex United, climbing the ranks. Then the interviewer asked about Carter. The room went quiet. Holloway's expression tightened just slightly. Bill was talented, raw, but unpredictable, not a team player. He had trouble accepting change. "What kind of change?" the interviewer asked. "Technological change," Holloway said. He thought it was cheating. He didn't understand that racing was evolving. Zoe scoffed under her breath. "He left the team?" the interviewer pressed. "He left everything," Holloway said, the smile returning. "Just disappeared. Some people aren't built for the big stage." Tyrell paused the video. "That guy," he said, "didn't just take Bill's spot. He stepped over his grave to do it." They dug deeper. Holloway's rise aligned perfectly with Bill's disappearance. Every endorsement, every win, every spotlight moment came after 1985. And as his public image grew, Bill's presence in the records diminished until it vanished altogether. Later that day, Zoe sat alone with Bill on the back steps of the garage, the kind of late afternoon silence stretching around them that only happened in small towns before dinner and after work. "Did he do it?" she asked. Bill didn't turn. "You know the answer. He took everything that should have been yours." Bill rubbed the back of his neck. "I handed it over. I walked away." "Because he pushed you out," she said. "Because you wouldn't compromise." "I wouldn't play the part they wrote for me," he said. "And Holloway, he was built for it. Clean, smooth, smiled when they told him to, drove what they handed him, said the lines, took the money. He played the role better than I ever could." Zoe shook her head, but it wasn't real. Bill looked at her finally. "What do you think this place is for? Why do you think I stayed? I'm not here to reclaim anything. I'm here because I got to build something real again. You never tried to clear your name?" He laughed, low and bitter. "There was nothing to clear. They didn't accuse me of anything. They just stopped mentioning me. No scandal. No headlines. Just a quiet erasure." Back at Zoe's house, her grandfather confirmed it all. He remembered the whispers back then. How Holloway had always wanted the spotlight. How Apex United's shift toward data-driven racing had created a rift between drivers. Carter had stood against it, and the team, needing a more manageable star, had chosen the one who wouldn't resist. But even with the truth now evident, there was no justice to chase. Holloway had built an empire, and Bill Carter had built silence. The next week, they kept working on the Mustang. Bill was different, not colder, but distant. Not because of the past, but because it was surfacing again, unasked for. He worked long hours, barely speaking unless necessary. When Tyrell asked him about a track strategy, Bill answered in clipped phrases. When Logan fumbled a component, Bill didn't correct him. He simply fixed it himself. Zoe approached him after hours, tension thick in the air. "We're not trying to stir up the past," she said. "I know. Then why pull away from us?" He took a long breath. "Because remembering too much can make you forget who you are now. And I can't afford to go back to being that man." "Which man?" "The one who wanted to be remembered." She sat beside him on the concrete step. "You already are, just not by the people who write the headlines." He didn't answer, but the next day, he handed her the distributor cap without being asked. A small gesture, but one that said what words couldn't. As summer wore on, the Mustang took shape. Each bolt, each panel, each wire became a piece of something more than a machine. It was becoming a story, one written not in ink, but in metal and resolve. And though Bill never said it out loud, something the way he moved, the way he lingered a little longer at the end of each day, suggested that maybe, just maybe, he would start to believe in it too. They didn't talk about Holloway again, not because they forgot, but because they knew now what had been taken and what had been built in its place. And in the silence of that dusty garage, surrounded by the smell of fuel and paint and something older than both, the ghost of Bill Carter wasn't fading. He was returning. The change was subtle at first. Bill still arrived at the garage before dawn, still kept his routines, still spoke only when necessary, but there was a different weight to the way he moved. Not heavier, but more deliberate, intentional, as though some thread inside him had finally begun to reconnect. The kids noticed, of course, not in grand gestures, but in the little things. When Tyrell stripped a bolt on the manifold, Bill didn't just fix it, he walked him through the correction. When Nick misjudged a valve lash on the rebuilt V8, Bill handed him a shim and micrometer without a word and waited patiently as he tried again. They had earned his attention. Now, they were earning his instruction. It was Zoe who felt the shift the most. She had stopped thinking of Bill as a legend. That word had lost its luster. He wasn't some forgotten hero or myth. They'd peeled that away. What remained was something rarer. A man who'd been carved down to the essentials and was now, somehow, rebuilding himself. One afternoon, while Logan and Tyrell worked on the Mustang's new wiring harness and Jace measured clearances on the pistons, Zoe sat with Bill on the edge of the lift bay. The sun leaked through the high window in fractured beams, lighting the floating dust like gold. You ever miss it? She asked. Bill didn't pretend not to know what she meant. I missed the moment, he said after a pause. The half second before the green drops. The sound of 30 engines waiting to scream. The silence in your head, knowing it's only you and the machine, not the cameras, not the engineers. Just instinct and asphalt. You could still have that, she said. I did, he replied, looking out over the cars. Every time one of you gets it right. Every time I see you feel the machine instead of fight it. She hesitated, then asked, Why us? Why teach us? His gaze settled on her, sharp but not cold. Because you showed up. Because you stayed. Because you listened. Zoe didn't say anything, but her chest tightened with a mix of pride and guilt. They'd stumbled into this looking for a shortcut, a miracle fix. But now they were part of something bigger than any of them had expected. Bill stood and walked toward the Mustang. He ran his hand along the primered fender like it was a living thing. This one's close, he said. She'll be ready to speak soon. You naming her? He chuckled. That's not my job. That weekend, the annual Summer Street Auto Fest lit up the neighboring town. It wasn't a racing event, more of a local car show and engine revving spectacle, but it drew attention, sponsors, old school racers, and gearheads from all over the region. The teens had never entered before. They always watched from the sidelines, marveling at the polished chrome and spotless restorations. But this year was different. We should bring the Charger, Tyrell suggested. It's not a show car, Nick replied. It's a Frankenstein. Exactly, Jace grinned. It runs, it roars, and it tells a better story than any of those showroom queens. They didn't ask Bill. They told him, and to their surprise, he didn't object. Instead, he tuned the timing, cleaned the plugs, and made small adjustments with the kind of care that looked suspiciously like pride. He didn't ride with them, but he followed in the old flatbed truck he sometimes slept in, parked on the edge of the showgrounds, and waited quietly while they registered the car. The Charger didn't gleam. Its body was still rust-patched, its seats mismatched, and the hood had 2 different shades of red. But when they fired up the crowd, the sound alone turned heads. It didn't purr, it growled. A deep, resonant tone that said this car had been through something and survived. By mid-afternoon, they had drawn a small crowd. Other entrants asked questions, some sneering, some curious. A former drag racer, gray-haired and sunburned, peered under the hood and muttered, "Who tuned this?" Logan glanced at Bill, who stood at a distance, arms crossed. "Just someone who knows what he's doing," he said. The old man nodded slowly. "Yeah, he does." They didn't win any official awards. No plaques, no ribbons. But they didn't care. A few people asked to take photos. A local blogger wrote a short piece on the ghost muscle that sounded like it had been forged in fire. And before they left, someone taped a business card to the windshield, an invite to a regional amateur race being hosted in 2 weeks. Back at the garage that night, the card lay on the workbench, untouched. "You should go," Zoe said to Bill. He didn't look at it. "Not my race." "We'll drive. You call the shots." I said I don't race anymore. "You wouldn't be racing. You'd be leading." He paused, finally picking up the card. The name printed on it was familiar to him. An old team manager from another era, now working with regional circuits. Probably a coincidence. But still, "You enter my name?" he asked. Zoe smiled. "No. Someone saw what you did, and they entered themselves." He put the card down. "I'm not going," he said flatly. The room went quiet. The hum of the garage lights and the soft, cooling tick of the Mustang's engine were the only sounds left. "Okay," she said finally. "Then we'll go, with what you taught us." That seemed to land harder than any argument would have. Bill didn't reply, but he didn't throw the card away either. The next morning, before the others arrived, Zoe found him working alone, adjusting the toe angle on the Mustang's front wheels. She didn't speak, just handed him a fresh coffee and joined him under the lift. He didn't mention the race again. But that day, he started showing them how to shave weight from the chassis, how to read tire degradation, how to listen to the way a car whispered just before it lost traction. And the way he moved, sharp, focused, hungry, told him everything. The spark had returned. He wasn't chasing the past anymore. He was building the future. The Mustang's body lay bare under a soft layer of primer, its chassis firm and composed. But that fragile equilibrium shattered in an instant when the invitation card resurfaced. The business card taped to the Charger's windshield that afternoon felt less like a courteous gesture and more like a grenade landing in the middle of their workbench. They stood around it, silent, curious, anxious. No one dared to reach for it first. Should have gone scrap paper. Logan finally muttered, breaking the stillness. Zoe shook her head. No, it's more than that. She traced the printed contact with a finger. The name struck like a memory, one buried deep in Bill's silence. Regional Classic Car Race. She read aloud. Says they like Bill Carter to serve as crew chief. Silence settled again. The card was both an invitation and a test. At dusk, Bill appeared in the garage door shadow. He hadn't spoken since the card arrived this morning, not even an acknowledgement. He moved with the same precision he reserved for the cars, but his expression was taut, closed. People are interested again, Zoe said. She didn't touch the card. They think you have something worth seeing. He didn't respond. Instead, he started packing tools with practice care. The next morning, Bill waited for them. The Mustang stood on the lift, engine exposed, its wiring harness nearly complete. Bill turned, holding an envelope. It was addressed to them in Zoe's handwriting. Inside, a printed email confirming their entry into the regional classic race. Samplers, rules, technical regulations. Zoe held her breath. Made it official, she whispered. Bill glanced at the envelope, then at Zoe, then around at all of them working to finalize the Mustang. His eyes softened, though the conflict remained. I'm done with that world, he said quietly. We know, Tyrell replied without looking up. But you're here with us, and now we're going forward together. The words hovered, unsentimental but real. Bill nodded slightly and walked toward the Mustang. He lifted a wrench and handed it to Logan, the gesture quiet but decisive. The following days felt electric. The garage brimmed with purpose and tension. Every fitting, every seal, every hose connection became critical. The weight of the upcoming race framed every movement. Bill returned to explaining road-holding principles, balance sheets, and safety checks. He taught them how to optimize gear changes for corner exit, how to identify brake fade, how to coax life out of aged carburetors. One evening, Zoe found a photo tucked into the invitation envelope. It was a snapshot from Bill's golden years, him sweaty and wide-eyed, helmet tucked under one arm, victorious in the winner's circle. She couldn't keep the disbelief out of her voice when she showed it to him. You were still amazing, she said. He didn't smile. Was. The next day, while adjusting rear camber under Bill's eye, Logan finally asked, Will you come with us? Bill looked up, surprise flashing in his eyes. Before he could respond, Zoe continued, You don't have to drive or appear. Just be with us. He resumed the task in silence. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but faintly hopeful. We'll see what's needed. And with that tentative consent, the wound, old and raw, was reopened. But it wasn't bleeding anymore. It was part of the healing. Practicing on the Charger felt different now. The roar of its engine echoed differently. They tested tuning configurations, swapped tires, and practiced mid-corner throttle control. Each lap felt like a step back toward what mattered. The machine, the team, and the moment. Then the day came. They loaded both cars onto tow rigs, Mustang and Charger side by side. Bill surveyed the convoy of old vehicles, the drivers mingling, the smell of fuel and rubber heavy in the air. A former amateur champion approached Bill, recognition plain in his eyes. You built that? He asked, nodding at the Mustang. Bill didn't smile. Help. That felt enough. In the pits, the Charger glistened with sweat and worn paint. The Mustang stood poised. Bill worked alongside them, tightening lug nuts with steady hands, checking tire pressures, watching the track. He was no longer invisible. He didn't need to be. When the race began, the air vibrated with anticipation. Though not professional, it held all the intensity of a real showdown. The Charger sputtered to life, and Bill's presence felt like its steady heartbeat. Throughout the event, The kids ran the pit board, waved flags, and swapped tires. Bill stood near them, silent but vigilant. Trackside, he watched the racers like someone remembering the shape of speed. That evening, as the crowd thinned and the track quieted, Zoe approached Bill again. "You did this," she said quietly. "You brought us back." He looked at the Mustang, now parked under race lights. "No," he said. "You did." In that moment, it wasn't about fame, victory, or legacy anymore. It was about belonging. In the echo of engines and the gathering dusk, Bill Carter stood not as a legend erased, but as a teacher found. And in that, all invitations, past and present, were answered. The morning of the race arrived with a stillness that felt deceptive. The track was alive with the usual buzz, trailers lining the gravel lots, crew members unloading toolboxes, engines barking to life in short bursts of mechanical breath. But around Bill and the team, there was a strange, heavy quiet. Not the kind that followed doubt or fear, but something more volatile. It was a calm before a storm that none of them yet saw coming. Bill stood behind the Mustang, eyes narrowed against the early light, watching the other team set up. Zoe was checking tire pressures. Logan and Jace were fine-tuning the laptop connected to the telemetry system they jury-rigged with Bill's guidance. Tyrell was managing fuel calculations. They had settled into roles, fluid and efficient, like a pit crew that had been together for years instead of months. Then came the rumble, not from the Mustang, not from the Charger, but from a deep, polished growl that sliced through the sounds of the morning like a blade. Heads turned. The source was a long, silver trailer pulling into the paddock, its side emblazoned with the unmistakable logo of Apex Motorsports. Zoe looked toward Bill instinctively, and for the first time since they'd met him, his expression cracked, not with fear, but with something close to disbelief. He stepped forward slightly, gaze fixed on the trailer, as if unsure whether what he was seeing was real or just the past mocking him with perfect timing. The trailer door hissed open, and a team professional stepped out in matching gear. Polished, perfect. A few seconds later, the man himself emerged, Marcus Holloway. Older now, but unmistakable. Tall, composed, every movement a calculated performance. His face had aged gracefully, his hair touched with silver, but the trademark smirk remained. Cameras flashed as photographers surged forward. Bill didn't move. Holloway, surrounded by assistants and officials, did a brief circuit around his car, a modified vintage roadster bearing his name in crisp lettering, and then, as if sensing something behind him, turned toward Bill. Their eyes met. It was only a moment, but it stretched endlessly. The noise around them faded. For the first time in decades, Holloway looked directly at the man who had walked away from it all. He blinked, then he smirked, and finally he walked over. "Well, I'll be damned," he said loud enough for others to hear. "Didn't think you'd ever crawl back, Bill." The words landed with a practiced casualness, but everyone heard the intent behind them. Bill didn't flinch. "I'm not here for you," he said, voice even. "Could have fooled me. Thought I saw your name on a crew list. Or is this just a charity project now?" Zoe stepped up beside Bill, jaw tight. "We're not here to impress anyone," she said. Holloway looked her over, then the Mustang behind her. Clearly, Bill's gaze stayed fixed on him. Still pretending to race? Still pretending to disappear? Holloway shot back, low enough that only Bill could hear it. There was a pause. Then Holloway turned back to the cameras, raising his hands to wave as if none of it mattered. But his eyes, just for a second, betrayed him. There was tension there. Not fear, but recognition. The past hadn't just arrived. It pulled up right next to him, uninvited and unafraid. The team regrouped after Holloway left, shaken but silent. "Are we seriously racing against him?" Nick asked. Zoe nodded. "That's what it looks like." Logan blew out a slow breath. "What do we do?" Bill glanced at the Mustang. "We do what we came to do." The qualifying heats were brutal. Holloway's car dominated, his lines flawless, his acceleration tight, but overly calculated. By contrast, the Mustang, guided by Bill's strategies and the team's determination, surprised everyone. They weren't flashy, but they were efficient. Every move was clean, every lap time consistent. The Mustang placed in the top 4 for the final event. The night before the race, Bill sat alone near the pits, a thermos in one hand, staring into the dark stretch of empty track. Zoe found him there. "You okay?" she asked. "Been a long time since I watched him drive." Bill said, "Does it bother you?" He was quiet for a moment. "It bothers me that I let him have the story for so long. You're rewriting it now." He shook his head. "No, I'm passing it on." She sat beside him. "We're ready." "You are," he said. "But you're not just racing a man tomorrow. You're racing his legacy. Everything he stole, twisted, built for himself. You'll be driving into the wind of all that." "Good," she replied. "Makes it easier to break through." Bill actually smiled. When race day dawned, the grandstands were fuller than any of them expected. Word spread that Holloway was making a rare appearance, and rumors swirled about the return of a forgotten rival. Bill refused all interviews, ignored all camera crews, and kept his focus entirely on the team. When the Mustang rolled to the grid, it looked sharp, not showroom perfect, but battle-ready. Every bolt had been checked twice, every setting dialed in under Bill's watchful eye. Holloway's car, gleaming in corporate polish, sat on pole. The Mustang was third. Engines roared to life. As the lights dropped, the race exploded into motion. The opening laps were chaos, vintage bodies jostling for position, tires screaming through corners, debris flying. Holloway maintained a tight lead, but Zoe at the wheel followed Bill's strategy to the letter. Hold back in the first half. Let the others overheat. Let the track wear them down. By the halfway mark, the Mustang was in second. Bill's voice came over the radio, calm and precise. "He's leaving a gap on the inside of turn 6. He thinks you won't take it." Zoe replied, "Then he's forgotten who taught me." The next lap, she slipped inside Holloway's line on the turn, tires barely holding. The crowd erupted. Cameras swung to capture it. The Mustang took the lead. And Bill stood on the pit wall, arms folded, eyes unblinking. They held that lead, lap after lap, under pressure from Holloway's faster but less agile machine. When the final lap came, it was wheel to wheel, every movement instinctual, every calculation immediate. As they crossed the finish line, the Mustang ahead by less than a second. The silence broke into cheers, gasps, disbelief. Bill didn't move, not right away. Then he exhaled slowly and smiled. The victory sent a tremor through the paddock. Not just for the teens who had crossed the finish line against all odds, but for the man who had once been erased by the very sport now forced to acknowledge him. Bill Carter didn't walk up to the podium. He didn't speak to the reporters clustering near the Mustang or bask in the surge of attention circling the team. Instead, he stood back, watching Zoe and the others receive a wave of congratulatory handshakes, pats on the back, and breathless questions. It wasn't humility that kept him out of the spotlight. It was something else, resolve, maybe, or understanding. This wasn't his race, but it had been his moment. As the crowd around the car swelled, Holloway stepped away from his pit, surrounded by handlers and officials, his jaw tight behind a forced smile. The loss stung, not because it was unexpected. He had known from a halfway mark that he was being outdriven, but because of who had made it happen. He didn't say anything to Bill as he passed him in the paddock. Didn't look at him, even, but the win had cracked something. For decades, Holloway had kept control of the story. Now the silence had been broken. Later that evening, long after the fans had cleared, the trophies distributed, and the echo of engines faded into memory, the team returned to the garage in silence. The Mustang had performed flawlessly. The Charger was still rumbling with pride. And Bill was still on his feet. Jace threw his arms wide as they parked. "You saw that, right? Please tell me someone recorded her overtaking Holloway into 6. "I did," Zoe said, "from 3 different angles." Nick laughed. That turn, he never saw it coming. He left a hole, and she drove a freight train through it. Tyrell added, with Bill's voice in our ears the whole time. Bill shook his head. "You don't win a race because someone talks you through it. You win it because you understand it. That's what you did out there." Logan grabbed a wrench and tossed it into the toolbox. "So what now? We actually start racing? For real?" Zoe looked at Bill, waiting. He didn't answer right away. Instead, He walked over to the Mustang, ran a hand along the roofline, and inspected the tape around the hood that had held through all the abuse. Then he said, "You're not ready for a full circuit season. Not yet. But what you did today, that was more than just a win. That was proof." "Proof of what?" Jace asked. "That the way we build still matters." The following morning brought something none of them expected. An email addressed to Zoe, but clearly intended for all of them, from a team manager representing a semi-professional development league. The tone was polite but impressed, offering a meeting to discuss possible mentorships, engineering roles, or future team placement. They had seen the footage. Word had spread. "What do we do with this?" Logan asked, scrolling through the details. Zoe glanced at Bill. "We asked the man who made it possible." But Bill was inside the garage. He was sitting just outside, perched on the edge of the loading dock with a thermos in hand, staring at the horizon like he always did when thinking too far ahead. When they joined him, Zoe handed him her phone. He read through the message silently, then handed it back. "You should go," he said. "We're not going anywhere unless you're with us," Nick replied. "You don't need me anymore." "That's not the point," Zoe said. "We want you with us." Bill smiled slightly. "The only reason I was able to help you is because I wasn't chasing anything. I had already lost the spotlight. You're just stepping into it." Logan asked, "You're not even curious what they'd offer you?" "They already made me an offer once," Bill said. "One I couldn't take. I'm not here to bargain for a seat at the table I once walked away from." That afternoon, while the others stripped the Mustang down for inspection, Zoe took the Charger out alone. She drove the back road surrounding the town, engine humming beneath her as she replayed the race in her head. Not just the overtakes and turns, but the voice in her headset, calm and confident, guiding her without control. Bill hadn't needed the wheel. He had taught her to feel it for herself. She pulled over on a long dirt stretch near the old rail line and got out. The Texas wind was dry and slow, kicking dust across the road. The Charger idled beside her, strong and steady. Just like Bill, when she returned, she found him sitting where she had left him, hands stained with oil, eyes clear. "You ever think you'll race again?" she asked. "I did," he said, "but I didn't have to be behind the wheel to feel it." They stood there a while, saying nothing. In the distance, the sound of laughter and tools echoed from the garage. The team was alive, and something about that sound carried more meaning than any victory speech. Then, from the street beyond the fence, a low rumble rolled closer. Another trailer. They turned just in time to see the Apex logo again. Another car, another team, but this time, it didn't stop at the paddock. It rolled slowly to a stop right at the edge of the lot. A man stepped out, not Holloway, but one of the Apex executives. He was holding a folder. "Mr. Carter," he called. Bill didn't move. "We'd like to talk." The kids appeared behind him, each one freezing when they saw the man and the trailer. "We saw what you did yesterday," the executive continued, "and we think there's value in that kind of leadership. Legacy, history, experience. Apex is expanding. We'd like to discuss a partnership, a mentorship program, consulting, whatever you'd be open to." Silence fell. All eyes on Bill. He walked forward slowly, stood face to face with the man. "I'm not here to rewrite history," he said. "I'm here to make sure the next generation doesn't forget it." The executive smiled. "That's exactly what we're offering." Bill looked back at the garage, at the team, then to the man again. "I already found my team." The executive didn't press. He handed Bill the folder. "Should you change your mind?" Then he turned and left. Bill stood there, watching the trailer disappear down the road. Then, without another glance at the folder, he dropped it onto the nearest workbench and picked up a ratchet. And just like that, the race ended. But the road ahead had only begun. The following week passed in a haze of oil-stained rags, long workdays, and a quiet hum of something close to disbelief. They had won. Not just the race, but the moment. The Mustang still bore the dirt and rubber scuffs on the track, but it stood proudly on the lift like a war veteran, battered, proven, and immortalized in local memory. The Charger, always a shadow hero, rumbled with quiet dignity every time Bill turned the key. Word spread quickly. Local news outlets published short features. A regional sports blog dubbed it the comeback nobody saw coming. But the most surprising attention came from deeper within the racing world. Industry names that hadn't spoken Bill Carter's name in decades now whispered it again, cautiously, as if afraid to wake something they had once buried. Then came the second offer. This one didn't arrive through a friendly email or a business card taped to a windshield. It came by courier, an embossed envelope delivered directly to the garage, sealed with the emblem of the Apex Heritage Division. Inside was a formal letter on heavy stock, the kind meant to be read slowly. It came from the desk of Elijah R. Palmer, executive chairman of Apex Global Racing. The message was direct, concise, too smooth. They weren't just impressed. They were interested. The letter extended a formal invitation to Bill Carter to join the Apex Legacy Project as a founding mentor and strategic advisor. The role included full access to historical archives, engineering resources, and, most notably, a platform to tell his version of the events surrounding his disappearance from racing. It was more than a job offer. It was an olive branch laced with ambition. Bill read it once, then again, then folded it and placed it face down on a workbench. He didn't say anything. The others stared at him, waiting. Zoe was the first to speak. "They're offering you your name back." Bill looked at her, not unkindly, but with something between disbelief and resignation. "I never gave it away," he said. "They just stopped using it." Tyrell walked over, picked up the letter, and skimmed it again. "They're saying they'll set the record straight. Publicly. Archive your races. Run your tapes. Give you credit. Even a say in how future projects are shaped. It's a clean slate," Logan added. "Maybe the one you deserved years ago." Jace snorted. "Sounds like they're trying to fix their own mess before someone else tells a real story." Zoe looked at Bill. "What are you thinking?" He didn't answer right away. He stood, walked to the edge of the garage, and looked out over the open field that had become their backyard, the place where everything had been rebuilt piece by piece. "When they erased me," he said finally, "I lost more than just a career. I lost the part of me that believed in what I was doing. That kid in the fire suit, he thought racing was about connection, about instinct, about something you feel, not just measure, but they wanted control, predictability, a machine that behaved like a spreadsheet. I wouldn't give it to them." "You still don't have to," Zoe said. Bill nodded. "But now they want me back because the story changed, because you made it change." Nick spoke up. "Then maybe this time you get to decide what part of it you want." The next day, a representative from Apex arrived, this time without cameras or a pitch deck. She was quiet, respectful, and clearly briefed on who Bill Carter was and what he had meant. She sat across from him in the garage's small office, a clipboard resting on her lap. "We're not asking you to forgive," she said carefully. "We're offering a chance to contribute, to shape what comes next." Bill listened, said little, asked even less. When she left, she placed a formal contract on the table. Zoe picked it up. "Are you going to sign it?" Bill stared at the document. "It's strange," he said. "After all this time, I thought I'd feel something. Anger, closure, relief. But mostly, I just feel distant from it." "You don't owe them anything," Tyrell said. "But I might owe it to the ones who come next," Bill replied. "If the next generation of drivers grows up hearing the wrong version of how this sport became what it is, then maybe silence becomes complicity." Jace raised an eyebrow. "You're thinking about saying yes?" Bill nodded slowly. "On my terms, with full transparency. No edits, no marketing fluff. If I'm going to talk, it's going to be the truth. All of it." They waited. 3 days later, Bill called the number on the contract. The same Apex rep returned, and this time he gave her a counteroffer. He would agree to consult conditionally. His sessions would be recorded and uncensored. He would speak not only of his career, but of the choices he made, the culture he rejected, and the cost of walking away. In return, he wanted full autonomy over a youth mentorship program, to be funded by Apex but operated independently, with his team, Zoe, Nick, Tyrell, Logan, and Jace, as its founding members. She didn't blink. "We'll need approval," she said, "but I think they'll take it." Bill smiled for the first time in days. Let me know when they do. When she left, Zoe stepped forward. Did you just turn a corporate buyout into a grassroots racing school? Bill shrugged. I said I'm not chasing legacy, but maybe it's worth building one. That night, the garage buzzed again, only this time, not with tension or uncertainty. It was the hum of something new being born, a future neither stolen nor inherited, but earned. They gathered around the workbench, pulled out fresh sheets of paper, and began sketching ideas of program, roster plans, tool budgets, engine kits, a possible calendar. Bill watched them with quiet pride. No cameras, no interviews, just steel, sweat, and the right kind of noise. As he walked outside to catch the last of the setting sun, the wind carried the distant sound of tires on asphalt. Some raced far off, echoing faintly into the fields. He closed his eyes, breathed it in, and felt something settle. Not closure, but purpose. The contract was signed, but not the way Apex had imagined. Bill Carter's conditions, drawn not in legalese but in plain, uncompromising terms, were agreed upon with surprising speed. There would be no rewriting of his story, no scripted redemption arc for public consumption. He would speak freely or not at all, and he would not serve as a corporate mascot for a system that had once erased him. What Apex gained in prestige, they would repay in platform and funding. By the end of the week, Bill's new youth mentorship program had a name, Ground Torque. It started with 5 names, Zoe, Tyrell, Jace, Logan, and Nick. But it wouldn't end there. The team converted the back half of the garage into a learning space. Nothing fancy, just workbenches, parts cabinets, a whiteboard, and stacks of worn-down manuals Bill had saved from decades past. Zoe drew up a schedule of rotating workshops, carburetor tuning, engine compression balancing, clutch maintenance. Tyrell proposed a driver training module built around instinct and feedback, not telemetry. Nick offered to repurpose an old simulation rig from his uncle's workshop. Logan volunteered to handle logistics. Jace began mapping potential partnerships with local schools and vocational programs. And Bill, he showed up every morning, same time, same boots, same thermos. But something in him had shifted. He moved with quiet purpose. The weight of secrecy finally lifted from his shoulders. He no longer guarded his knowledge. He passed it down like a torch. Word spread quickly. Teenagers from nearby towns started visiting. Some with genuine interest, others just curious about the rumors of the ghost racer teaching out of the junkyard. They brought questions, broken lawnmowers, go-karts, and stories. Some stayed, some left, but the ones who stayed for good reason. There was no application form, no tuition, just the expectation that you showed up, shut up, and learned. One afternoon, as Bill explained the art of manual heel-toe downshifting using a beat-up transmission he had mounted on a stand, a young girl from a town 30 miles out asked, "Did you ever race in the big leagues?" Zoe opened her mouth to interject, but Bill raised a hand and answered for himself. "I did," he said, "and I lost something bigger than a trophy. That's why I'm here now, so none of you have to give up what matters to win." It was the first time he had spoken of his past in front of newcomers. Later that week, a camera crew arrived, hired by Apex to record the first set of legacy interviews. Bill let them in, but set the rules firmly. No edits, no direction, no prodding. They would capture what he said or leave with nothing. The interview lasted 2 hours. He told them everything, how he started, what it felt like behind the wheel at Le Mans, the moment he realized he was being pushed out, and why he walked away. He spoke plainly, without drama, without self-pity. He spoke not as a man seeking redemption, but as someone who had made peace with his scars. When the interview ended, the crew didn't applaud. They didn't need to. The silence said enough. That evening, as the sun fell behind the far end of the lot and the heat softened into something breathable, Bill sat with Zoe on the tailgate of the truck. "They'll ask me to go on a speaking tour next," he said, "or start a book. Maybe even slap my name on a race team. Will you?" "No." "Why not?" "Because that's not what I'm building." She nodded. "You're building something better." He took a sip from his thermos. "I never wanted fame. I wanted meaning, and now I've got it. She looked toward the garage where Tyrell was showing two new students how to properly read tire wear. Think it'll last? She asked. Only if you protect it. Zoe didn't speak again for a while. She knew what he meant. The work would never be done. There would always be more kids, more machines, more doubts to dismantle, and more lessons to pass on. By the end of the summer, Ground Torque had helped rebuild 3 cars, trained 15 students, and hosted its first track day. Nothing competitive, just a test session on a rented oval. But for the students who drove, some of them gripping a steering wheel in a car they'd helped build for first time, it was a race that would stay with them forever. A local reporter showed up unannounced. She didn't ask for photos, just a few quotes. When she approached Bill, he simply said, "We're not here to win races. We're here to raise drivers." The headline the next day read, "From legend to legacy, the racer who chose the garage over the podium." Bill laughed when he saw it. "They still don't get it," he said. Zoe grinned. "Doesn't matter. We do." One night, months after the victory, after the crowds had quieted, the cameras had stopped flashing, and Apex had shifted its attention elsewhere, Bill stood alone in the garage. The Mustang sat under a tarp, preserved, respected. The Charger still ran like hell. But it was a third car, the rusted shell of an old Datsun 240Z that a kid named Hector had brought in. That made Bill smile. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't fast. But it was being rebuilt from the ground up, with bare hands, with focus, with pride. He walked over, turned on a small light above the workbench, and began sketching out an intake manifold design. It was quiet, simple, steady, and it was everything he had ever wanted. Years passed. The garage changed, but slowly. The dents in the steel walls remained. The ceiling fan still rattled when the wind came down hard from the north, and the dust never quite stopped settling into the corners. But the benches were fuller now, not just with tools, but with people. Some were new students, others returning ones, a few now teachers in their own right. Ground Torque had grown, not into a corporation, not into a brand, but into something harder to find and far more enduring, a community. Bill Carter didn't sit as often anymore. He moved slower, surer, and his hands stiffened when the weather shifted. But he was still there every morning when the lights flickered on and the smell of grease and metal thickened in the air. His voice didn't boom, but when he spoke, people stopped to listen. There was no need to remind anyone of who he had been. His legacy lived in every student who torqued a bolt without over-tightening it, in every custom-fit manifold made from scrap, in every engine that roared back to life under bare hands. One of those students, a wiry kid named Lucas on the outskirts of town, had shown up 4 years earlier with a busted-down '92 Civic and more stubbornness than mechanical sense. He had listened, failed, broken parts, asked questions, stayed late, and learned. And one day, quietly, he'd gotten it right. Now he stood trackside, not just as a racer, but as one of the youngest qualifiers for the national touring circuit. The championship event had drawn in press, teams, agents, all orbiting the main spectacle, the new generation of talent. Shiny suits, clean helmets, and among them Lucas, wearing a patched-up jumpsuit with Ground Torque stitched unevenly across the back. Bill wasn't in the front row. He was in the stands, off to the side, among old racers and families, and crew members too sunburned to care about VIP boxes. The race was intense from a green flag. A pack of drivers jostled for dominance through the opening laps, but Lucas held his line like he'd been born on asphalt. He didn't overtake recklessly. He didn't brake late for crowd. He drove the way he'd been taught, measured, precise, with the car instead of against it. Halfway through the final lap, as Lucas held the inside line through the tightest corner of the circuit, a commentator's voice cracked over the loudspeaker. That's Lucas Herrera from Ground Torque, making a move that looks vintage Carter. If you know, you know. It wasn't said for ratings. It wasn't a line from a script. It was real, a recognition that had taken decades to come full circle. Lucas crossed the line in second place, less than a second behind the leader. But the finish didn't matter. His radio crackled with his team's cheers. In the crowd, Bill said nothing, just gave the faintest nod as the announcer praised a new talent rising out of nowhere. Back at the garage that night, the team returned as they always did. No banners, no parades, just oil-stained rags, motors cooling on stands, and students bent over projects with quiet purpose. Lucas found Bill standing beside the Datsun, the same one he'd started working on as a boy. "I owe everything to a man who once asked for a meal in exchange for fixing an engine," he said. Bill smiled, not wide, but real, "and you paid it forward. That's all the thanks I need." The others gathered. They'd all heard what Lucas said during his speech on the track. The broadcast had reached beyond the stands, across social media, even into the ears of the very executives who once signed away Bill's legacy. But this time, no one came knocking with offers or apologies. They didn't need to. Legacy, it turned out, didn't need validation. It needed continuity. That night, Bill stayed late, alone with the cars. He walked past each bay, each frame, each tool rack, like a man visiting old friends. The Charger sat in the far corner now, no longer the centerpiece, but never forgotten. Its paint was more rust than red, but it still ran. The Mustang rested under a tarp, preserved like a sacred object, untouched but revered. He ended where he always did, at the notebook, the same one he had written in for years. Notes on engine timing, advice for new students, sketches of parts that didn't exist yet, but might someday. He flipped to the last page. The space was blank. He picked up the pen, hesitated, then wrote. It wasn't the comeback they remember. It was the lesson they carried forward. He closed the notebook and set it on the shelf. Not the top one, the middle one, easy to reach. The next morning, the team arrived to find him already there, coffee in hand, blueprints spread across the table for a new electric build they had been planning. No one asked if he was tired. No one asked if he was done, because everyone already knew the answer. He would never be done. Not while there was still someone who needed to learn what it meant to feel an engine with your hands, to respect the roar of combustion, to understand that driving was more than competition. It was communication. Bill Carter had been a legend, but he chose to be a teacher. And in the hum of tools and the smell of motor oil, in the laughter between mistakes and silence between gear changes, his story lived on, not in headlines, but in garages, where it belonged.